My fiancé stood by while his family tormented me over my late father's past, so I exposed their darkest secrets and cut them off. Now, years later, he's back, lurking in my parking lot at midnight, staring up at my window, and I can only wonder what he's planning to do to me. My fiancé and his relatives mocked my late father at our engagement celebration, so I handed him my wedding band and never looked back. I'm 31, and just a few months ago, I was betrothed to Ben. We first encountered each other at a company gathering approximately 5 years prior, and I still recall how he kept everyone entertained with the most unusual trivia facts. Ben hailed from a wealthy background. His family possessed a chain of medical clinics, and his parents, Richard and Caroline, were fixated on what they termed distinguished lineage. Initially, I perceived them as merely pretentious, but with time, I realized their beliefs ran much deeper. Regarding my own parents, my mother was absent from my life, and my father passed away 3 years ago due to hepatic failure. He battled alcoholism for the majority of my formative years, but achieved sobriety when I was 15. For the final 13 years of his existence, he served as an addiction counselor, assisting countless individuals in achieving recovery. I pursued a career as a social worker because of his influence. Ben was aware of all this and consistently appeared supportive. The issues began at a country club brunch with Ben's parents. Caroline inquired about my family's medical history for insurance purposes, and I disclosed my father's struggle with addiction and his subsequent recovery. She literally froze, mid-smile. Richard cleared his throat and shifted the topic. Later, Ben drew me aside and suggested perhaps I should refrain from mentioning the addiction aspect to other people. I ought to have recognized the warning signs then, but I dismissed them. Matters worsened at a family dinner when Ben's brother, Mark, a physician, began making jests about genetics and predispositions to addiction. He would wait until I took a sip of wine, then utter remarks such as, "You know, addiction runs in families." Caroline was no better. Her gaze tracked my hand whenever I reached for my glass, and I did not miss the way her lips tightened when I poured a second serving. Ben's sister, Lisa, leaned forward and stated, "I've been reading about offspring of alcoholics, and apparently, they are 3 times more susceptible to developing issues." She articulated it as if discussing the weather. When I brought it up to Ben later, he chuckled and said, "They're just looking out for you. Don't worry, my parents adore you," all while gently rubbing my shoulder reassuringly. However, after that conversation, I overheard Ben discussing genetic screening and safeguarding family assets. When I confronted him, he finally confessed the truth. His parents desired me to sign documents agreeing to genetic counseling before we had children because they intended to test me for addiction genes. He attempted to persuade me to comply, asserting that alcoholism is hereditary. If my own fiancé distrusting me wasn't sufficiently dreadful, I subsequently discovered that someone had printed my father's obituary and used a yellow highlighter on every reference to his addiction. They had circled years of struggle and battle with alcoholism as though constructing a case against me. The engagement party was the point of absolute explosion. Richard rose with his champagne flute and offered a toast about selecting partners with sound genetic profiles and expressing gratitude for their unblemished family history. He looked directly at me when he pronounced unblemished. Caroline interjected about how some families possess unfortunate vulnerabilities that are transmitted like a curse. She, too, gazed directly at me when she uttered curse. Mark made a quip about how at least I would recognize the indicators when our children began consuming alcohol, and everyone laughed. I had never experienced such profound humiliation, and I honestly could not fathom that Ben remained silent. He simply sat there, sipping his wine and glancing at me to ensure I wasn't touching the wine bottle. Honestly, I believe that was the absolute worst it could become. But then, Richard announced they had engaged a private investigator to delve into my family background and proceeded to retrieve a folder from who knows where, commencing to read from it. They had unearthed records of my grandfather's alcoholism and my great-uncle's addiction. They had tracked down distant cousins with DUIs. They actually constructed a family tree on a poster board with all the affected members marked in red ink. My father's name was circled 3 times. Richard held it aloft as if presenting evidence in a courtroom. The ultimate indignity was when Caroline suggested I ought to consider undergoing sterilization to prevent transmitting the addiction gene. She articulated it as though she were doing me a kindness. Ben merely sat there, nodding in agreement, but I had endured enough. I rose before everyone and disclosed Caroline's Xanax dependency, which she believed no one knew about. I had discovered the pills when assisting her in organizing her bathroom. Richard's 2 DUIs, which he had paid to erase. Mark's white powder issue in medical school that nearly resulted in his expulsion. I possessed screenshots and receipts for everything because I had commenced keeping records after that initial dinner when something felt amiss. I recounted to everyone how my father perished saving lives, how he sponsored 37 individuals who remain sober today, how he never missed a single day of work at the treatment center, even in his final illness, and how immensely proud I was to be his daughter. Then, I removed my engagement ring and dropped it into Ben's champagne glass. The entire room fell silent. I departed while they all remained seated, mouths agape. 2 days later, Ben appeared with an envelope filled with photographs he had secretly captured during our most intimate moments. He stood at my doorway, holding them like playing cards. I felt nauseated. He pushed past me into my apartment and spread them across my coffee table. I could not believe what I was witnessing. There were dozens of them. He informed me I needed to sign a declaration asserting everything I had stated about his family was falsehoods. He had already drafted it. The document claimed I was mentally unstable and fabricating accusations due to my family's history of addiction. I seized the photographs and attempted to shred them, but he produced his phone. He possessed backups of everything. I instructed him to vacate my apartment. He declared that if I did not sign the paper, he would transmit the photos to my supervisor at the social services office. He understood the conservative nature of my workplace. He knew it would devastate my career. I propelled him toward the door, but he refused to leave. He continued to wave his phone in my face, displaying the email he had already composed for my supervisor. My hands trembled, but I managed to remain composed. I informed him his actions were illicit. He laughed, stating his family retained the finest legal counsel in the state. He asserted no one would believe the daughter of an alcoholic over a respected medical family. He granted me 24 hours to sign the document, or he would press send. After he departed, I contacted the police. 2 officers arrived and took my statement. I explained about the photographs and the threats. They stated that without proof of the blackmail, there was little they could do. One of them suggested I alter my locks. The other recognized Ben's surname and became quiet. I realized then and there they would not assist me. The following morning, Caroline appeared at my workplace. She strode directly past reception as if she owned the premises. She located my desk and began speaking loudly about her profound concern for me. She informed my colleague Nancy that I was enduring a challenging period and contending with the same struggles as my unfortunate father. She placed her hand on Nancy's arm and expressed worry that I might be consuming alcohol at work. Nancy appeared bewildered and attempted to return to her computer, but Caroline persisted. She declared that addiction was a familial ailment, and she merely wished to help me before it was too late. She produced brochures for rehabilitation centers and left them on my desk. By the time I returned from a client meeting, half the office was whispering about it. My supervisor, Margaret, summoned me into her office that afternoon. She inquired if everything was satisfactory at home. She mentioned Caroline's visit and expressed apprehension regarding the allegations. I attempted to explain, but Margaret interrupted me. She stated she had to treat any substance abuse concern seriously, given our work with vulnerable populations. She suggested I take a few days off to resolve matters. I returned home feeling defeated. When I reached my apartment building, I observed a moving truck outside. I rushed upstairs to discover the locks had been changed on the apartment Ben and I were supposed to share next month. All my belongings were in boxes in the hallway. The superintendent stated Ben had shown him the lease with only Ben's name on it. I had been foolish enough to entrust him with the paperwork. I began sifting through the boxes, searching for my father's possessions. His AA medallions were absent, as was his journal and the photo album from his counseling center. The box containing all his personal effects was missing. I telephoned Ben, but he did not answer. I messaged him, demanding my father's items back. He responded with a photograph of my dad's 10-year medallion and stated I could retrieve it when I signed the declaration. I had to enlist my friend Tyler to help me relocate everything to my current apartment. While we were loading boxes into his truck, a courier arrived. He handed me an envelope from Richard's legal firm. Inside was a formal demand for $50,000. The letter claimed they had expended that sum on wedding preparations, and I owed them for breach of promise to marry. It itemized everything from the venue deposit to Caroline's mother's dress alterations. I could not afford legal representation, so I sought assistance from legal aid. The volunteer there remarked that breach of promise lawsuits were uncommon, but not impossible. She stated I would need to demonstrate they were harassing me. I presented her with the letter and explained about the photographs. She advised me to document everything and begin constructing a case. She also suggested I examine my credit report and bank statements. That is when I uncovered Ben had been intercepting my mail. Several credit card statements were missing. When I contacted the bank, they stated my address had been changed 3 weeks prior. Ben had been receiving all my financial information at his office. He knew precisely how much money I possessed and its location. The bank representative mentioned someone had attempted to add an authorized user to my account, but the request was denied. I spent the subsequent day on the phone with every financial institution I could conceive of. I altered all my passwords and placed fraud alerts on everything. My friend Alexis, who worked at a different bank, observed some unusual activity when she helped me open a new account. Someone had been making small test deposits and withdrawals, as though they were mapping out my finances. She assisted me in securing everything and transferring my funds. Meanwhile, Mark began appearing at my work meetings. He had somehow ascertained my schedule and would coincidentally be at the same coffee shop or building lobby. He would wave and smile as if we were old acquaintances, then initiate conversations with whomever I was meeting. He informed my largest client that I was under investigation for insurance fraud. He stated he could not elaborate, but they should exercise caution. The client telephoned my boss the next day and withdrew their account. I forfeited a $20,000 contract due to that fabrication. The Henderson Group had been my most significant client, and when they called to terminate our agreement, citing concerns about professional stability, I knew precisely where those concerns had originated. Margaret summoned me back into her office that same afternoon. Her usually warm demeanor had considerably cooled. She sat behind her mahogany desk, fingers steepled, regarding me as though I were a predicament to be resolved. "I'm growing concerned about all the turmoil affecting our workplace," she stated, not quite meeting my eyes. The afternoon sun slanted through her office windows, casting sharp shadows across her face. "Perhaps you should take extended leave until matters subside." I attempted to explain that Ben's family was targeting me, that this was deliberate persecution, but she simply reiterated that she had to consider the agency's reputation. Her voice possessed that careful, measured tone people employ when they have already reached a decision. 20 years of building my career at this firm, and it was disintegrating because of fabrications. That night, I discovered Ben's silver BMW parked outside my apartment building. He was merely sitting there in the dark, engine off, observing my third-floor windows. The street light illuminated half his face, making him appear like something from a horror film. I stood at my window for a moment, watching him watch me, feeling my skin crawl. I captured photographs with my phone, ensuring to record his license plate and the timestamp. When I contacted the police, the dispatcher sounded bored. They stated he was not violating any laws by sitting in his car on a public street. I inquired what I needed to do to obtain a restraining order. The officer's voice became condescending as he elucidated I required proof of threats or violence. Apparently, blackmail did not count without evidence. The following morning, there were notes beneath my windshield wiper, damp from the morning dew. Not explicitly menacing, but profoundly disquieting. One read, "Your father would be disappointed," in Ben's distinctive handwriting, the same meticulous script I had once found charming. Another stated, "Genetics always win," with a crude sketch of a DNA helix. A third simply bore my father's sobriety date with a question mark appended. I stood in the parking lot, hands trembling, as I meticulously placed each note into a plastic bag. I kept them in a folder with everything else, screenshots, emails, text messages. My documentation pile was growing substantial, but no one seemed to care about any of it. Caroline escalated her workplace visits with theatrical flair. She began bringing elaborate baked goods to my office, homemade cookies in decorative tins, fresh bread wrapped in checkered cloth, behaving like some deranged 1950s homemaker. She would sweep through reception with a concerned smile, informing everyone she was worried I wasn't eating properly. "You know how stress affects appetite," she would say, patting the receptionist's hand, especially with a family history of, "Well, you know." She would corner people in the break room, speaking in hushed, anxious tones about my mental state. I overheard her telling Janet from accounting that she had noticed concerning alterations in my conduct. "The paranoia is truly troubling," Caroline stated, shaking her head sadly. "It runs in families, you know." Her poor father struggled with reality too. She informed the receptionist she had observed I had lost weight and wondered if I was using substances. The way she pronounced substances made it sound like I was injecting drugs in the restroom. She even brought a substance test kit once, an actual over-the-counter substance test, and left it on my desk with a note written on her medical practice letterhead. "Just in case you want to prove everyone wrong. We're here to help when you're ready." The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. My colleagues began giving me strange looks, conversations ceasing when I entered rooms. I complained to HR, but they stated she wasn't technically doing anything wrong. She was merely a concerned family friend dropping by. They suggested I speak to her directly about boundaries, as if this were some simple misunderstanding between rational individuals. When I attempted to call her, she would not answer. Her voicemail message was saccharine. "You've reached Dr. Caroline Morrison. If this is a medical emergency, please hang up and dial 911. When I appeared at her residence, a sprawling colonial in the suburbs, Richard answered the door and threatened to summon the police for trespassing. "You're not welcome here," he stated, his surgeon's hands gripping the doorframe. "Stay away from our family." I was ensnared in this peculiar game where they could harass me, but I couldn't even communicate with them. Then my landlord called. Mr. Petrov had owned the building for 30 years and had always been equitable with me. His voice was troubled as he explained he had received a letter from Richard's legal firm asserting I was being evicted from my previous apartment for property damage. The letter included photographs of a ransacked apartment, holes in walls, broken fixtures, carpet stained with what appeared to be wine or blood. It wasn't even my old apartment. I recognized it as a unit from a building across town that I had never inhabited. "I know this is false," Mr. Petrov said, his Russian accent thickening with anger. "I called your previous landlord myself. You were a perfect tenant. But I wanted you to know someone is trying very hard to damage your reputation." He had been in business long enough to recognize a smear campaign. He said, "Be careful. People with this much money and time, they can be dangerous." I began varying my routines obsessively. I would park in different locations, sometimes walking an additional 3 blocks just to avoid predictability. I would take different routes to work, departing at unusual times, doubling back to check if I was being followed. But Mark always seemed to locate me anyway. He would materialize at the grocery store while I was comparing yogurt prices, at the gym while I was on the treadmill, always maintaining that doctor's professional smile. "Funny running into you here," he would say, as if our encounters were coincidental. He would engage in small talk about genetics and family medical history, inserting subtle digs disguised as concern. "You know, mental illness is highly inheritable," he mentioned once while we both waited at the deli counter. "Have you ever been screened, given your family history? It might be wise." Once, he inquired if I had considered having my fallopian tubes ligated, since mental illness also ran in my family. "It's the responsible choice," he stated, selecting organic turkey. "Some genetic lines should terminate." I began recording our conversations on my phone, keeping it in my pocket with a voice memo application running. The breaking point arrived when I visited my father's grave on a gray Thursday afternoon. I brought fresh daisies, as I did every month, his favorite flowers, simple and genuine, like he had been in his sober years. But when I arrived, someone had already visited. Empty beer bottles were arranged around his headstone like some morbid shrine. Budweiser, his old brand. They had poured alcohol on his grave, the scent of stale beer mingling with the aroma of cut grass. The groundskeeper, an elderly man named Eduardo who had always been kind to me, stated a well-dressed couple had been there earlier, claiming to be family. The description perfectly matched Richard and Caroline. They said they were his brother and sister-in-law, Eduardo explained, wringing his hands. "I'm so sorry. If I had known." I sat there, weeping and cleaning up the mess with paper towels from my car. My father had been sober for 13 years before the cancer claimed him. He had been so proud of his sobriety chips, keeping them in a special box by his bed, and they desecrated his grave with alcohol, transforming his greatest triumph into a mockery. It was cruel beyond words. I captured photographs of everything. The bottles, the stained granite, my father's name obscured by their vandalism. I added them to my expanding file, but photographs of beer bottles were not proof of anything, according to the police. They stated anyone could have left them there, maybe some kids, the officer suggested. "It happens." Ben began growing bolder with his harassment, as if testing boundaries. The calls arrived at all hours from blocked numbers, sometimes silence, sometimes breathing. Once, I heard what sounded like my father's favorite song playing faintly in the background. He would dispatch food deliveries to my apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning, always alcohol, cases of beer, bottles of wine, compelling the delivery drivers to knock until I answered. "This is harassment," I informed one bewildered driver, holding a case of vodka. "I didn't order this." But they would always state it was prepaid, the order confirmed. He had signed me up for addiction recovery newsletters and had them sent to my workplace. Brochures for rehabilitation facilities would materialize on my desk. AA meeting schedules were tucked under my windshield wipers. Everything was orchestrated to make me appear unstable and validate his family's assertion about genetics and weakness. The psychological warfare was exhausting. I discovered he had been contacting my references and informing them I was in rehab. When Jennifer, my former supervisor from my first job out of college, telephoned to check on me, her voice was filled with concern. "Ben called, claiming to be from an intervention service," she said. "He was asking about your drinking history, whether I'd ever noticed problems." I didn't believe him. "You were always professional. But I wanted to make sure you were okay." She had known me for 15 years and did not credit the falsehoods. But how many others had he telephoned? How many people now believed I had a problem I did not possess? My professional network was being contaminated one call at a time. My friend Robin, who worked in IT, possessed skills I desperately required. She assisted me in tracing some of the harassment, working on her laptop in my living room while I paced anxiously. The blocked calls were originating from burner phones purchased with cash, but the delivery orders had IP addresses they traced back to the medical practice's Wi-Fi network. It's not definitive proof, Robin stated, adjusting her glasses, but it's something. They're getting sloppy. She also helped me install security cameras around my apartment, inexpensive ones from Amazon that I could not truly afford but could not live without. We positioned them to cover my door, the parking lot, and the mailbox area. The financial harassment escalated into something that felt like economic warfare. Richard's legal firm dispatched new demands every week, each more outrageous than the last. Now they sought $70,000 for emotional distress. They claimed I had slandered their family name and damaged their medical practice's reputation. They included screenshots of negative reviews that mentioned the engagement party incident, reviews posted by accounts created the day after the party, all with generic names and no other activity. I knew they had probably composed those reviews themselves, but I could not prove it. The letters arrived on expensive letterhead, delivered by certified mail, each one a fresh reminder of how outmatched I was. Then Caroline filed a police report, alleging I had stolen jewelry at the engagement party. She claimed a diamond bracelet and earrings were missing, family heirlooms, she said, worth at least $15,000. She possessed photographs of herself wearing them at the party and receipts demonstrating their value. 2 days later, the police appeared at my apartment with a search warrant. 3 officers meticulously searched everything while I stood there in shock, watching them rummage through my underwear drawer, empty my jewelry box, check inside my shoes. Of course, they found nothing because I had taken nothing. I had never even seen the jewelry she described. The search was beyond humiliating. My neighbors peered out their doors, observing the police cars with their flashing lights. Mrs. Chun from across the hall would not make eye contact with me afterward. My landlord telephoned again, his voice strained. "I believe you," Mr. Petrov stated, "but other tenants are complaining. They're scared. If police visits continue, I'll have to reconsider your lease. I'm sorry, but I have a business to operate." I felt as though the walls were closing in on me from every direction, Ben's family orchestrating my isolation with surgical precision. I went to stay with Tyler for a few days, just to escape my apartment and the constant apprehension of awaiting the next assault. His spare room was small, but felt safer than my own home. But somehow, Ben discovered my whereabouts. Tyler awakened me at 6 o'clock in the morning, his face pale. All 4 of his car tires had been slashed overnight, the cuts deep and deliberate. His mailbox was crammed with addiction pamphlets addressed to me. Understanding your alcoholic friend, when love isn't enough, intervention strategies that work. His front door had been plastered with AA stickers. Tyler was supportive, but I could discern he was becoming frightened. "This is insane," he stated, looking at his destroyed tires. "Who does this?" I did not fault him for being terrified. Ben's family possessed wealth and connections. They could afford to be patient, to slowly dismantle everything around me. Fighting them felt impossible, like attempting to restrain the ocean with my bare hands. At work, matters deteriorated rapidly. Margaret placed me on administrative leave pending an investigation into the fraud allegations. "It's just protocol," she stated, not meeting my eyes as she handed me the letter. "Until we can clear this up." But I knew my career was hanging by a thread. Without my income, I could not afford legal counsel to contest Richard's demands. My savings were dwindling, expended on security cameras and changing locks and fuel for constantly varied routes. Ben's family was systematically dismantling my life, and I could not stop them. Then I caught a break. My coworker Brenda telephoned on a Tuesday evening, her voice hushed and urgent. "You need to see something," she said. She had been working late on a presentation and decided to review the security cameras after all the strange visits. The footage depicted Caroline in the building after hours, moving through the darkened hallways with purpose. She had somehow obtained a key card and was in the offices alone. Brenda fast-forwarded to show Caroline near my desk, in the file room, spending almost an hour in the building. "This is from 3 days before she filed that theft report," Brenda stated, her finger pointing at the timestamp. "We observed Caroline going through my desk drawers, checking my file cabinet, even looking through my coat pockets. She had a small bag with her and appeared to place something inside it. Then she went to my work locker and performed an action we could not quite discern. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear she was up to something. I requested Brenda save the footage. She made multiple copies and provided them to me on a flash drive. "Be careful," she stated, looking around nervously. "These people seem dangerous." I embraced her, grateful to have someone who believed me, who could perceive what was truly occurring. Robin helped me enhance the footage using some software she possessed. Frame by frame, we could observe Caroline placing something in her bag near my locker, something that caught the light like jewelry. Then she went to my desk and appeared to plant something in my bottom drawer. The quality wasn't superb, but it was evident she was engaged in something illicit. "This is it," Robin stated. "This is evidence of them framing you." I finally possessed proof of their harassment. It wasn't everything, but it was more than I had previously. I presented the footage to the police the following morning. The same officer who had dismissed me before watched it with a frown, his skepticism slowly transforming into concern. "This is interesting," he admitted. But she could claim she was retrieving her own property or had permission to be there. Still, he consented to add it to the file. He also mentioned, almost casually, that Caroline had been telephoning the station frequently, inquiring about the investigation's progress. "She seems very eager for us to arrest you," he said, almost too eager. The next day, I discovered pages from my father's journal scattered in my car like confetti. They were torn and crumpled, some pages entirely missing. Someone had highlighted every mention of his drinking days in yellow marker, circling words like hammered and blackout and rock bottom. They had written genetics in the margins in red pen, like father, like daughter, across one page. My car had been locked, so I knew Ben still possessed my spare key from when we dated. But the most distressing part was witnessing my father's private thoughts violated like that. Those pages were sacred to me, his honest account of his journey to sobriety. He had given them to me before he died, stating he wanted me to comprehend his struggle. Now they were being utilized as weapons against me. I installed a dash cam that day, further depleting my checking account. It was a basic model, but it would record anyone approaching my car. I also began carrying pepper spray and keeping my phone recording in my pocket during any encounters. I felt paranoid, starting at shadows, checking locks obsessively, but Ben's family had demonstrated they would transgress any boundary. I had to safeguard myself, even if the police would not. The breakthrough came from an unforeseen source. Austin Shun, who served as office manager at the medical practice, contacted me through LinkedIn with a cryptic message. "We need to talk about R&C. Not safe here." We arranged to convene at a diner 40 minutes outside town, a place where we would not be recognized. Austin appeared anxious when he arrived, constantly glancing over his shoulder. He had worked for the practice for 10 years, he explained, commencing right out of college. "I thought they were good people," he stated, clutching his coffee cup. "But what they're doing to you, it's evil. And it's not the first time they've destroyed someone who got in their way." He produced a thumb drive and slid it across the table. "Hundreds of emails," he said. "Richard's been discussing your removal with Caroline for months. They planned everything like a military operation. The emails detailed strategies for harassment, discussions about hiring the private investigator, plans to discredit me at work. Caroline had boasted about obtaining my key card from Ben and using it to access my workplace. She called it planting seeds of doubt," Austin stated, his voice disgusted. But the emails revealed something even more significant. Richard had been utilizing the medical practice to bill insurance companies for procedures that never occurred. Phantom patients, fabricated treatments, inflated costs. He had been doing it for years and had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars. Caroline assisted by altering patient records, creating false documentation. Mark was also aware of it, even participating by filing false claims for consultations that never transpired. The entire family was implicated in massive fraud. "I've been gathering evidence for months," Austin explained, his hands shaking slightly. "I knew something illegal was happening, but I was scared. They have connections everywhere. But watching them destroy you, I couldn't stay silent anymore." He provided me with everything: patient records, billing statements, recorded conversations he had secretly made. "I'm leaving town tomorrow," he stated, "starting fresh somewhere else. But someone needs to have this evidence in case something happens to me." I spent the next 2 days reviewing everything with Robin. The fraud was extensive and meticulously documented. Richard had been careful, but not careful enough. He had used his work email for everything, likely believing he was untouchable. The evidence demonstrated years of systematic theft. Patients billed for surgeries they never had. Insurance companies defrauded of millions. We organized everything into clear files with summaries and timelines, creating a roadmap of criminal activity that spanned nearly a decade. But I required more proof of what they had specifically done to me. The dash cam finally proved invaluable when it captured Ben breaking into my car again at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. The footage was crystal clear, thanks to the street light. He possessed a key and was placing more torn journal pages on my seat, arranging them carefully for maximum impact. He looked directly at the camera without realizing it was present, his face perfectly visible, that familiar sneer I had once mistaken for confidence. I finally had him on video committing a crime. I made copies of everything and distributed them strategically. One went to Tyler, hidden in his apartment. One to Brenda, who secured it in her safe deposit box. One to Robin, who uploaded it to multiple cloud services. And one to a safety deposit box I rented at a bank across town. I was taking no chances. If they came for me, the evidence would endure. Then I returned to the police with everything. This time, I encountered Detective Sarah Chun, a financial crime specialist who actually listened. She watched the dashcam footage and read through some of the emails, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is beyond simple harassment," she stated. "The insurance fraud makes it a federal crime. We're talking major felonies here." She summoned additional detectives, and within hours, they had opened a genuine investigation. They took all my evidence, made official copies, and stated they would be in touch. For the first time in weeks, I felt as though someone was actually listening. But I knew Ben's family would not surrender without a struggle. Sure enough, the next day, Richard appeared at my apartment. I heard him in the hallway arguing with Mr. Petrov, demanding to be admitted. When I foolishly opened my door to ascertain what was transpiring, he pushed his way past me, his face red and contorted with fury, nothing like the composed surgeon who had once intimidated me with his calm demeanor. "What did you do?" he shouted, backing me against my kitchen counter. "Austin's disappeared, and the FBI seized our computers. Years of work destroyed because of your vindictive lies." He seized my arm, his surgeon's fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're going to fix this. You're going to tell them it was all a misunderstanding, or I'll destroy you completely. You think this was bad? I haven't even started." I managed to pull away, my arm throbbing. "Get out, or I'll call the police," I stated, attempting to keep my voice steady. He laughed, an ugly sound. "The police? I've donated to their campaigns for years. The mayor comes to my Christmas parties. You're nothing, a nobody with a hammered for a father and delusions of importance." But then his phone rang. I watched his face transition from red to white as his lawyer spoke. Federal agents were at the medical practice, seizing records. There was a warrant for his arrest. Richard looked at me with pure hatred, the mask finally completely removed. "This isn't over," he stated. "You've destroyed my family, but we'll destroy you. Even from prison, we'll destroy you." Then he departed, slamming my door so forcefully the frame cracked. I immediately contacted Detective Chun to report the threat, my hands trembling as I described the encounter. She stated she would send someone immediately and to secure my doors. As I awaited the police, I surveyed my apartment. The security cameras, the pepper spray, the folder of evidence. All the ways my life had been distorted by Ben's family's harassment. But I had survived. They had attempted to obliterate me with falsehoods about genetics and weakness, but I had fought back with truth. My father would have been proud. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers took photographs of my bruised arm and the cracked doorframe. They stated Richard was already in custody when they received the call about him being at my apartment. Apparently, he had gone straight from threatening me to his lawyer's office, where federal agents were waiting. The timing could not have been more opportune. Detective Chin telephoned that evening with updates. They had arrested Richard at his lawyer's office, and he was being held without bail. The FBI had been investigating the medical practice for months based on anonymous tips. Austin's evidence simply provided them with everything they needed to proceed. Caroline was apprehended at her Pilates class. She apparently created a scene, screaming about her husband's donations to the police foundation. Mark attempted to flee, but they caught him at the airport with a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. I thought that would be the conclusion of it, but Ben was still at large. He had been astute enough to steer clear of the fraud, but foolish enough to persist in harassing me. The following morning, I awoke to discover my car covered in eggs and shaving cream. The dash cam captured him doing it at 4 a.m., looking directly at the camera again, as if he had forgotten it was there. He had written "hammered" on my windshield in shaving cream. Truly mature for a 34-year-old man. I was cleaning it off when my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, finally conversed with me again. She handed me a towel and stated she had observed Ben lingering around the building. She had contacted the police, but he had departed before they arrived. She apologized for avoiding me after the search. Her nephew had problems with addiction, and she had been scared. But she had been watching, and she knew I wasn't drinking. She had seen me return home from work every day, never stumbling or smelling of alcohol. Sometimes neighbors notice more than you think. That afternoon, Brenda telephoned with astonishing news. Caroline had been captured on the building's loading dock camera, attempting to break in again. This was after she had made bail, violating the conditions immediately. She possessed bolt cutters and was attempting to gain entry through the back entrance. Security called the police, and she was arrested again. This time, The judge revoked her bail completely. She would spend the months until trial in jail. The investigation continued to expand. Other employees came forward about the fraud. Patients who had been overcharged wished to testify. The FBI discovered offshore accounts with millions in stolen funds. Every day brought new revelations about the depth of the corruption. Local news picked up the story. Prominent medical family arrested in million-dollar fraud scheme, ran in the paper. They used Richard's professional headshot, where he appeared so respectable. If only people knew what he was truly like. Ben must have seen the news because his harassment intensified. He began leaving dead flowers on my car. He signed me up for hundreds of email lists about addiction and mental health. He had pizza delivered to my apartment every night for a week, always paid in cash. The delivery driver started recognizing me. One kid said, "Rough breakup," and I just nodded. If only it were that simple. I continued documenting everything. The dash cam was worth every penny I had spent on it. It caught Ben keying my car one night, dragging his keys along the driver's side while looking around nervously. It caught him applying glue to my locks. It caught him leaving a box on my hood that turned out to be full of empty beer bottles and a note that stated, "For when you're ready to be like Daddy." The security cameras at my apartment captured him attempting to pick my lock at 3 a.m. He was terrible at it, fumbling with the tools he clearly just purchased. He gave up after 20 minutes, but the attempt was sufficient for Detective Chun. She obtained a warrant for his arrest on multiple counts of harassment, stalking, and attempted breaking and entering. They apprehended him at his office the next day. His arrest was almost anticlimactic. I had anticipated some dramatic confrontation, but he simply went quietly. His lawyer appeared within an hour, discussing mental distress and temporary insanity, but the dashcam footage was too clear. The pattern of harassment was too well documented. The judge denied bail, citing the extensive evidence and pattern of escalation. Ben would await trial in jail, just like his parents. With all of them incarcerated, I could finally breathe. I returned to work, where Margaret apologized profusely. The fraud allegations had been officially dropped, and the agency wished to rectify matters. They offered me a raise and a promotion to senior social worker. Some of my colleagues were awkward at first, but most were supportive. Janet from accounting brought me coffee and stated she never believed the rumors. Nancy said she knew Caroline was lying the moment she appeared with those substance tests. The Henderson Group called, desiring to renew their contract. They had seen the news and realized they had been deceived. They offered to pay extra to compensate for the inconvenience. I accepted their apology but maintained the same rate. I wasn't attempting to profit from this predicament. I simply desired my life back. Mr. Petrov telephoned to check on me. He stated he was proud of how I had handled everything. He had experienced his own encounters with affluent bullies when he first arrived in America. He reduced my rent for the next 3 months to assist with the legal expenses. I attempted to decline, but he insisted. "Good tenants are hard to find," he stated, "especially ones who stand up to corruption." The trial commenced 6 months later. I had to testify in both the fraud case and the harassment case. It was nerve-wracking, but I simply articulated the truth. The prosecutor had organized all the evidence beautifully. Emails, financial records, security footage, everything painted a clear picture. Austin flew back to testify too. He appeared healthier, stating he was working for a nonprofit now and loved it. Richard's trial was first. He attempted to appear dignified in his orange jumpsuit, but the evidence was overwhelming. Patient after patient testified about being overcharged. Insurance investigators detailed the millions in false claims. His own emails demonstrated he knew precisely what he was doing. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He received 15 years in federal prison and had to repay everything he stole. Caroline's trial was next. She attempted to portray herself as the victim, claiming Richard coerced her into assisting, but her emails showed she was an eager participant. She had even devised some of the schemes herself. The security footage of her planting evidence in my locker was particularly damaging. She was found guilty and received 12 years. The judge termed her actions a betrayal of public trust. Mark pleaded guilty to avoid trial. He cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence of 5 years. He had to surrender his medical license and pay substantial fines. His career was over before it truly began, all that education wasted because he believed he was above the law. Ben's trial was last. His lawyer attempted every defense: temporary insanity, emotional distress, even claiming I had led him on. But the evidence was too strong. Hours of dashcam footage, security videos, documented harassment over months. The torn journal pages were especially damaging. The prosecutor called it a campaign of psychological torment. He was found guilty of stalking, harassment, blackmail, and attempted breaking and entering. He received 3 years in state prison and a permanent restraining order. After the trials concluded, I finally retrieved my father's belongings. Everything was returned, including his AA medallions and journal. Some pages were missing, but I had copies from before. I placed everything in a new memory box and kept it somewhere secure. These items meant everything to me, and I had fought diligently to recover them. The civil suit was straightforward after the criminal convictions. My lawyer stated it was one of the easiest cases she had ever handled. The harassment was documented, the damages were clear, and they had already been found guilty of crimes against me. We settled out of court for $200,000 to be paid from the seized assets. I did not desire their money, but my lawyer stated I deserved compensation for what they had subjected me to. I used some of the money to settle my father's remaining medical bills. The rest went to the treatment center where he had worked. They utilized it to establish a scholarship fund for individuals who could not afford treatment. They named it after my father. He would have cherished that, helping people achieve sobriety even after he was gone. Tyler and I remained friends, though it took time to return to normalcy. He had to replace all 4 tires and deal with his own trauma from being drawn into the mess, but he stood by me through everything. He even testified about the harassment at his home. True friends appear when circumstances become difficult. Robin helped me upgrade my security systems with superior cameras and smart locks. She stated I would probably never require them again, but peace of mind was worth it. She also assisted me in completely overhauling my digital security. New passwords, 2-factor authentication on everything, regular credit monitoring. Ben's family had taught me to never again be careless with personal information. I began seeing a therapist to address everything that transpired. Dr. Kim helped me process the trauma and paranoia. Being stalked and harassed for months leaves scars, even after it ceases. She helped me feel secure again, to stop checking locks obsessively and jumping at unexpected noises. Recovery isn't solely for addiction. Sometimes, it's for surviving someone else's cruelty. A year later, I was promoted again at work. My experience with the legal system made me more effective at advocating for clients. I understood what it felt like to be dismissed and disbelieved. I knew how it felt when systems that should safeguard you fail. It made me more tenacious in fighting for the vulnerable individuals I served. I continued visiting my father's grave with fresh daisies. The groundskeeper, Eduardo, always waved when he saw me. He had given extra attention to that section of the cemetery, keeping it especially neat. The grass grew back where the beer had been poured. Nature heals, even deliberate cruelty. Sometimes I encounter people who knew Ben's family. They usually appear embarrassed and alter their direction. Once, I saw Lisa at a coffee shop. She turned pale and practically fled. I did not feel vindicated or pleased about it, just saddened that an entire family destroyed themselves because they could not accept that addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. I still retain all the evidence in storage boxes, printed emails, USB drives of security footage, photographs of every incident. My lawyer stated I could probably discard it now, but I keep it, not because I'm paranoid, but because it reminds me that I fought back and prevailed, that their money and connections could not silence truth. The treatment center invited me to speak at their anniversary gala. I spoke about my father's journey and how stigma nearly ruined my life. I recounted to them about Ben's family and how their prejudice led to their downfall. The room was filled with people in recovery, their families, and counselors who understood. Several individuals thanked me afterward for demonstrating that recovery is something to be proud of, not to conceal. I'm dating again now. His name is David, and he's a teacher. I recounted the entire story to him on our 3rd date, expecting him to flee. Instead, he stated his sister was in recovery, and he understood completely. He has met my friends, seen my security cameras, and never once made me feel paranoid or damaged. When someone reveals who they are, believe them. Ben's family showed me their cruelty. David shows me kindness. The medical practice closed after the scandal. The building was sold and transformed into a community health center that serves low-income families. They offer addiction treatment services, among other things. There's something poetic about that. A place that once propagated stigma now helps people heal. I kept the engagement ring box, but not the ring. Ben never requested it back, and I sold it to help pay for legal fees. The box rests on my shelf, holding paper clips now. Sometimes I gaze at it and recall how different my life could have been, married into a family that despised a fundamental aspect of who I am. Thank God for that dreadful engagement party. My father would have been proud of how I handled everything. He taught me to confront difficult realities and contend for what is just. He showed me that recovery is attainable and stigma is merely ignorance disguised as concern. His sobriety granted me strength when Ben's family attempted to use it against me. They believed his addiction made me vulnerable. Truly, it made me indomitable. The last I heard, Richard was in federal prison, instructing literacy classes. Caroline was working in the prison kitchen. Mark was in minimum security somewhere upstate. Ben was due for parole soon, but the restraining order was permanent. They had forfeited everything attempting to destroy me. Their medical licenses, their reputation, their freedom, their fortune, all because they could not accept that genetics is not destiny and addiction is not a moral failing. I still work at the same social services agency, still reside in the same apartment, still visit my father's grave with daisies. But everything is different now. I'm no longer afraid, not checking locks obsessively or varying my routes, not documenting every interaction in case I require evidence. I'm simply living my life, assisting people, honoring my father's memory. Sometimes clients inquire how I remain resilient in such a demanding field. I inform them about my father's recovery and how it inspired my career. I don't usually mention Ben's family unless it's pertinent. That chapter is closed now. But the lessons endure. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of your origins, and always fight back against bullies, regardless of their financial standing. The scholarship recipients from the treatment center send updates sometimes. People reclaiming their lives, reuniting with families, securing employment. Each success story disproves Ben's family. Addiction isn't a death sentence or a genetic curse. It's a disease that can be treated. Recovery is possible. My dad proved it. Those scholarship recipients prove it. And I prove that no amount of money or connections can obliterate truth when you refuse to yield.